of the things that I don't think people really pay enough attention to is not just the individual technologies or individual technology opportunities that we're going to see and be able to take advantage of. And some of these would be things like synthetic biology and artificial intelligence, hypersonics, energy systems. There are a variety of individual technologies that are going to have profound implications on our militaries in the future. It's very difficult to predict, though, which of those are going to be the most transformative and which of those are going to be the most disruptive in terms of the type of threats that they represent or the type of opportunities that they represent to NATO members. So what I think is equally, if not more important, is how technology itself is evolving. You're familiar, I think most folks are familiar with this concept of Moore's Law, which is the number of circuits on a microchip increases, doubles every, I think, 18 months now. And that rate of change implies that new capabilities that we may not be able to predict are going to emerge at faster and faster rates. So the question for our militaries needs to be, how do we compete in a technology environment that really is very different from what we were used to in the past? The planning cycles that traditional militaries follow are very protracted. We tend to follow a strategic forecasting model that looks at what our adversaries are doing and then tries to predict the capabilities that we need to develop. What that doesn't account for is this idea of technology disruption, where smaller scale actors or more non-traditional threats have the ability to capitalize on research and development coming out of the commercial marketplace or coming out of the university community that's in the public domain and create things that were traditionally only available to the advanced militaries of the world, and do so at a cost and time scale that defies the traditional military planning models. So this whole idea of rapid technology change and introducing the organizational innovations within the NATO member acquisition system in order to both capitalize on some of these technology changes as well as mitigate potential threats before they manifest into problems is something that really needs to be driving our strategic thinking going forward. As we become more reliant on some of these technologies, that reliance represents a risk. It represents a risk to our civil societies. It represents a risk to our militaries. If the cell phone nets go down, if GPS is denied, if communication satellites are taken out, if our networked energy infrastructure is somehow compromised, the absence of all that can throw an advanced society like the U.S. into a total state of chaos. Therefore, the technology has empowered us to do some amazing things. It also represents a vulnerability that in the networked cyber world, folks can take advantage of. I think there's a real opportunity for NATO to play a coordination role, a facilitation role in building a NATO innovation marketplace. So where commercially derived products that may be available in one of the NATO member states are marketed to and available to other NATO members. And here I'm not talking about military-specific systems so much as I am dual-use technologies that may be produced by high-tech companies in the Netherlands or high-tech companies in France. And NATO, given its position operating between all of these member states, is in a great position to fill this role of sharing information regarding technologies, not just associated with military programs, but associated with the high-tech markets that exist in each of the NATO member countries on the civilian side, and make other NATO members available of what those technologies are, what they can do, how they can potentially support various gaps and needs within the overall NATO enterprise. And part of that, to be honest with you, involves concept development and concept of operation development for how these technologies can be applied. By extension, standards is a very important consideration when you talk about leveraging technology from the commercial marketplace. So, what should the standards be when a NATO member wants to leverage a commercial off-the-shelf mobile handset and put it on a NATO network or a NATO member state network, helping to define some of those considerations that'll make it easier for NATO members to tap into the commercial marketplace or the academic research community and take advantage of some of those technologies is something that would really add a lot of value. I'll say one other thing. Innovation, the idea of innovation really has a lot to do with sharing information, sharing best practices regarding either technologies or business processes or operational concepts for the use of technology. This marketplace idea for NATO could also be a clearinghouse for these technology lessons learned or market lessons learned regarding new technologies. This is a concept that we've been looking at in the Department of Defense with an initiative called Technology Domain Awareness, where we're trying to take advantage of individual technology prototyping activities with an eye towards identifying lessons learned that can be shared, not just across all the services, but also with our NATO partners and our international partners, as well as looking into the commercial marketplace and trying to identify key technologies that are relevant to different military missions, and then making those technologies, giving them a platform to market those technologies to the appropriate customers within DoD and hopefully within the NATO community ultimately as well. I think a final point that I'll make here is it's a mistake to assume that the United States has innovation figured out. I think there are folks who have the idea that if you want to innovate, you got to do exactly what Silicon Valley is doing. And Silicon Valley has a model that works in Silicon Valley, and the Department of Defense and NATO are not Silicon Valley. So we can learn a lot of lessons from that community, but to try to mimic or mirror what they're doing is a recipe for failure. By the same token, there's a lot of great stuff that are taking place in other NATO member markets and other NATO member organizations that the U.S. can learn from, that the Department of Defense can learn from. And NATO can play a role in helping us access those lessons and connect with the right stakeholders in other NATO member states to help build more of a collaborative dialogue around innovation. The example I'll use here is the synergies that France in particular has been able to develop around their commercial technology industry and their military technology industry. France has done a wonderful job of let's say, getting commercial industry closer to the needs of their military organizations, which is exactly the direction that the Department of Defense needs to be moving in. And they can teach us something. So I think the main point that I'd like to make is this. Given the rate of change in technology, new ways of doing business are required. And by and large, the search for the technologies that will matter from a competitive military standpoint is not the real question that we need to be worrying about today. The real strategic issue is how do we make our technology organizations more agile, more flexible, and more cost effective relative to what we see happening in the commercial marketplace. And what is the approach that we need to deploy to realize some of the benefits and by the same token mitigate some of the challenges emerging as a result of advances in technology driven by the commercial marketplace. There are different modes of thought, different schools of thought. Do we want to look more like the commercial marketplace? Do we want to mimic what they're doing? Do we want to somehow shape the commercial marketplace? Do we want to be what they call a fast follower, where we buy things very quickly and integrate them across our militaries? Some of these fundamental questions are things that are going to have to be answered very rapidly, or all of the NATO member militaries, including the United States, are going to find themselves behind the advances we see coming out of the commercial marketplace. That's a scary proposition because by and large those technologies are available to our adversaries, and we got to figure out how we're going to counter that potential threat.